national issue, apparently, with the Confederate statues and monuments. They're having this battle now in Charleston, West Virginia, with a Stonewall Jackson statue. And we saw what happened in Durham, North Carolina last night with protesters violently tearing down a statue. Governor Jim Gray in Lexington wants to remove a couple of Confederate statues there. I want to get your thoughts on this.
I mean, for starters, the kind of racial hatred that we're seeing from people, as has been said by the president on all sides, people are offended at the idea that people take exception with a particular type of hatred versus another. All of it is reprehensible. It just is. There's no reason for it. There's no room for it. It doesn't further anything. And the fact that it has been allowed to accelerate out of control as it has is irresponsible on the part of people who allow it to happen. It's an abdication, frankly, in some instances of enforcement activities, of leadership, and it's a shame. The fact that people were allowed to clash with one another as they were in Virginia, that people were encouraged to come in and counter-protest and be just as violent and angry as the hateful people that came in the first place. People knew what was going to happen, and it's unfortunate. And the result of that is innocent lives were lost. And I find the whole thing disgusting, and it's heartbreaking, frankly. And then you see law enforcement officers who are called in to try to monitor in some form or fashion. And in the case of a couple of state troopers in Virginia whose lives were lost as a helicopter went down. Then you see what happened in North Carolina. Where was the law enforcement? How long did it take for somebody to start to damage and desecrate public property? Regardless of someone's opinion of it, is this a society we want where crowds of hundreds of people are allowed to, in an unfettered manner, wreak havoc and express their physical response to public property? I think it's a dangerous situation that we find ourselves in. We had some months ago an effort by similar groups of hateful people to come to Eastern Kentucky. They did, in fact, come to Eastern Kentucky and had a similar rally. And we made sure that they were kept separated from everyone else. We had appropriate amount of law enforcement. We did not encourage counter-protests. We did not discourage it, but we made sure that everybody was kept separate. And we made sure that the entire protest was met with an appropriate amount of law enforcement presence. And the net result was people were allowed to spew their opinions, and some of those opinions are pretty offensive to most people. But we sadly, that's one of the privileges of coming in a free society is that unfortunately, along with the privilege of the free society, comes the necessity to hear things that are hateful. But on both sides that happened. We kept it separated, and people moved on. And they took their hate somewhere else, including to these towns we've seen recently. And I just think that it's time for Americans to get past this foolishness of spewing their differences verbally and in doing what they've done physically, and start to remember that we are one nation under God, indivisible.
Governor, the fact of the matter is we have a history, and there were Confederate generals, there were Union generals from Kentucky, from West Virginia, or what's now known as West Virginia. I mean, it's part of our history. Should that history be removed? Should it be off government ground? Should it be destroyed? What should our reaction be?
No, I mean, I absolutely disagree with this sanitization of history. If we want to learn from history, if we don't want to repeat the mistakes of our past, then we better teach it to our young people. It better be known. It doesn't have to be celebrated as in this was something we did and we should do again, but to pretend that it didn't happen, to remove from society, because where do you draw the line? At what point, if somebody happened to have been a judge and something was erected in their honor, but they happen to have one ruling one time that somebody's offended by. Is that worthy of them being removed from pretending that they ever existed? We're starting to see this same type of thing happen on college campuses. And I just think it's a dangerous precedent. This idea that we are not allowed to talk about certain elements of our history, or that we basically have revisionist history and pretend it didn't happen, I think is a very slippery slope, and I think it's dangerous.
Mm. Do you think, you talk about people coming in for protest, and certainly in Charlottesville, the people there, the local people said, this is not us. These people were from out of state, and we've seen that in other areas where the protesters were bussed in. Do you think that there's a possibility that some group has paid to have young people come and protest, and in some cases, maybe the people protesting, they don't even really have any idea what they're there for?
I really don't know. I do know that it did seem as if on both sides of the clashes that there were a lot of people sort of milling about, seemingly somewhat aimlessly. But truth be told, I have no idea what brought them there or what their true ideology is. But it was an environment in which they were not discouraged from massing and clashing with one another. And that's where I think a huge mistake was made. Much more effort should have been made to discourage that type of activity, because we've seen in every culture, in every country, in every day and time, human beings, when given the chance to cause trouble in a crowd, find themselves letting that get out of control.
Do you feel like, if there is some type of protesting in Lexington over the possible removal of the statues there, that that'll be a much more peaceful situation?
I can't speak for what the city of Lexington will do, but I will speak for the state of Kentucky as a state, as happened when people met in our state parks to try to do the exact same thing a few months ago. As I said, such activity will be discouraged to the degree possible, as in we don't want that nastiness and foolishness in our state. But because this is a free society and there's only so much that can be shut down in advance, then such activity, if it moves forward, will be met with an overwhelming amount of preparation. And it will not be allowed to accelerate to that degree. And that's what I would encourage for Lexington or any other city, to allow people, as the city of Baltimore's mayor said a year ago or whenever it was, that we need to leave room for destruction. Nonsense. We do live in a civilized society, and that type of destruction of human life, of public property, of whatever the case might be, should be hammered down with absolute conviction. And it should be clear to people that there's no tolerance for that whatsoever, no matter the motivation.